That's a look at the cloud field around Tropical Depression Beta, down to 10,005 millibars and winds of 35 miles an hour. The current location of Tropical Depression Beta is between Victoria and Houston, Texas, and it's inland and now starting to move towards Louisiana, and it should be there tomorrow. You can see that the surface wind field is, well, it does have kind of a northerly component there. Now we're on the northern side of the tropical depression, and this is a look at the trajectories going back in time. The lowest trajectory near the ground coming from Arkansas and Mississippi. But as we go higher, we see source regions coming more and more from the Gulf. So our rich tropical moisture is just off the ground, and we're getting that convective process going in the depression and a wet bulbing effect as it falls into the drier layers near the surface. And as a result, the temperatures come down into the upper 60s. That's not typically what you see in a tropical cyclone, so that's the contribution of dry air coming into the storm from the north. So here we're going to take a look at the past 72 hours of beta, and there it is. You see a few pulses of convection coming together, but eventually it lands on the Texas Gulf Coast, and we see no deep convection this morning. At this time, most of the convective towers are topping out at about 20 to 25,000 feet, and this storm has not really come together due to the infiltration of dry air, and the storm was affected by moderate wind shear, which reduced the ability for the storm to organize. Now this is a 72-hour loop. This is sensitive to water vapor in the lower part of the atmosphere. So this red and orange area up here in Texas, that is dry air. We had 50s and lower 60s dew points in Texas at the time. Now I want you to ignore this area right here because that's going to corrupt the moisture signatures in the low levels. That yellow and blue and white, that's upper level water vapor, and that's going to obscure what we see at the surface. So just pay attention to this orange, and I'm going to run this forward. You can see that wedge of cold air just kind of enters the south side of Tropical Storm Beta there, and towards the end you see it wrap around, and that pretty much kills off the storm. So what we're left with is a tropical cyclone without much fuel. Heavy rainfall potential will be the main threat. It's not a whole lot of precipitation, but some spotty areas around Houston towards Beaumont will be getting a little bit over 4 inches. Widespread 2 to 4 inch amounts, and that track will carry it on up into northern Mississippi, and wouldn't you know it, Atlanta once again. And NHC pretty much clearing out the Atlantic there. We do have Teddy still underway, 105 mile an hour hurricane, and that's bearing down on Nova Scotia. So we may take a quick look at that, and also a very small chance that this could come together into a tropical depression around the Florida Keys. And there's the warnings for eastern Nova Scotia. Gusts up to about 50 to 65 miles an hour are expected. And there's the latest technical discussion from the Canadian Weather Service. You can freeze frame that at your leisure and read through it. And these are made available at weather.gc.ca under this menu tree right here. This is a good time to take a look at the hemispheric view. This is North America here, the Pacific on the left side, and the Atlantic on the right side. We've got a very deep low in the Gulf of Alaska, and very strong jet stream energy coming onto the northwest coast there. There's a circulation there associated with Teddy, and I don't see any sign of the subtropical ridge. Maybe very weak across Florida, but most of that is going to be well to the south. So the patterns are very much like October going into early November. Let's run things forward, see what's going to happen as the week goes on. What we see there is things getting very stormy in Washington and northern Oregon. Series of troughs coming onto the coast there, and they work over the ridge into Minnesota and the Great Lakes. So things will be a little bit unsettled in the Midwest as well. Now, it does look like the subtropical ridge is starting to make an appearance, building into Southern California and elongating that ridge into the Dakotas. So we're at about Thursday here. Going forward into Friday and Saturday, very strong flow across the northern U.S. If you're flying from New York City to Seattle, that's probably going to add to your flight time. Very strong headwinds. Series of troughs going across the northern states there. So looks like maybe some rain for Minnesota. There's another trough going across the Dakotas on Sunday. And now the flow is getting really long. See that right there? That's dynamically unstable, and that's going to lead us into very likely a high amplitude pattern as that starts buckling. And yep, there it goes. So building that big old ridge on the west coast, and now we're bringing down Canadian air on the last week of September. So it's going to get cold in the northeastern U.S. And let's go to the latest chart we have right there. Yeah, that's the Polar Express. So we're looking at below normal temperatures in the eastern half of the U.S. and warm out west. Let's track those air masses with the temperature anomaly. Now, Pivotal Weather, they do have a temperature anomaly product, but I prefer the 850 temperature anomaly as that kind of removes some of the diurnal effects. So running that forward, we will see the cold front making a dramatic entry into the northwestern U.S. around Wednesday. Kind of a mild pattern through the weekend, and then as we go into later next week, we start shifting into kind of a cold pattern. See that right there? Cold air developing in central Canada and working its way southeast. So, yeah, that's going to be kind of a cold period late next week. Now, Europe is also looking at a very dramatic and unusual pattern coming up later this week. This is the current map there, and what we see here is kind of mild conditions, a little bit of showery weather across central Europe, but this very strong cold front is moving through Ireland and Scotland. If we go forward into tomorrow, you can see that cold front sweeping east. It's kind of hard to see, but there is actually a low right there, and that goes up as a warm front into another low and probably curves up into that thing there off Norway. Anyway, what's notable about this is it's September and there's this big 540 line. That's usually the rain-snow transition line. Not so much into Europe, but you know, in the U.S. we do consider that a transition. So that's cold air coming into western Europe. And then we get this really strong shot coming up around Thursday. And that really drives the cold air eastward. And you can see these snow showers developing in the Alps, in the Pyrenees. And looks like cold rain across much of the Netherlands and Belgium. And this is actually a very gusty, blustery, cold pattern going through Amsterdam, Brussels, London, Hamburg. Yeah, so September 2020 bringing some interesting weather. And this is a trajectory plot I created for London. This is valid for Thursday night when England is getting the brunt of the cold air. Now we can kind of disregard the surface trajectory, but just above the surface you can see the cold air is originating from the Arctic. Another important finding is you can look at the curve to kind of see what kind of weather system is influencing it. Down around Ireland and England, that's cyclonic curvature there. So that's being influenced by the presence of a low pressure area. And then we see anticyclonic curvature here. So there the air mass is under the influence of high pressure. And you can kind of guess what these correspond to. Looks like a series of lows and highs, and they just kind of pass the air mass off one by one all the way to the British Isles. So bringing things back to the southwestern U.S., no Arctic air to be found there, but conditions are seasonal. We do have this old stationary front kind of hung up in the southern Rockies. That's been there for about the past week. We can see the very dry air, and it's also very cool. So that's had a source region originally from Canada, and it's slowly modified. What we have over Arizona, that's more of that summer type air mass. Desert air sitting there and gaining heat from solar heating. So that's going to be a slightly different air mass there. Then up to the north, we do have this weak cold front working through Nevada. We can see a little bit of that on the satellite chart. Yep, and there it is. There's that front in Nevada. It's mostly a mid and upper level feature. I think probably by tomorrow it's going to be in the process of frontolysis. There is some residual moisture in the higher elevations of the Rockies. That's from air that has kind of migrated northward along the tail end of that front in Texas. And then, of course, out in Texas itself, we do have Tropical Depression Beta and the associated cloud shield extending all the way up to Kansas City. Up to the north, we do see a better view of that frontal system. You can see that vague S shape there. And this kind of tells me that the comma head is somewhere in here. The baroclinic low in that area, maybe a cold front, and then a warm front, somewhat like that. So we're going to be looking for that on the surface chart. The windward slope of the Cascades kind of cloudy, so we've probably got some flow coming in from the Pacific. There's the placement of systems in the northwestern U.S. This is a very weak cold front. The Weather Service is not even really tracking that. But these kinds of temperatures late morning in September, that's on the cool side, and it contrasts quite a bit with what we see in the Salt Lake City area. Another weak cold front found up in Montana and Saskatchewan, and not much else going on in the northern plains. Very cool weather in the northeastern U.S., 50s and 60s, with high pressure across Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. There is a cold front well up to the north, near Thunder Bay, Ontario, but that is probably not going to affect anyone south of the Great Lakes. Warm air advection returning to the Great Plains and the western Midwest, bringing up 70s and much higher dew points. So that'll be probably our next big change, migrating from west to east during this week. And the satellite confirms it is a nice day across the northeast, but you go a little further to the east, and yeah, there's trouble out there. That's Teddy approaching the Canadian Maritimes. And there's a better look at it. Doesn't look like any impacts really for Maine. You can see the cold air stratocumulus offshore, as the cold air mass picks up heat and moisture from underneath and develops vertically. And then in the southeastern U.S., we pick up our other tropical system, Tropical Depression Beta. That'll be moving into the Houston area later this afternoon and into Louisiana tomorrow. There's a surface map at this hour. It looks like Tropical Depression Beta has kind of picked up that boundary. A few days ago, it was pushed down off the Gulf Coast there. It sat out there for probably several days, and I think the tropical cyclone has picked that up, and it's becoming somewhat baroclinic. And you can see the temperature contrast. Very warm conditions offshore, very high dew points, and then you get up to the north of there, the air mass has had a more northward origin. The maritime tropical air mass, that is overriding the cool air, and we saw that earlier with the trajectory plots. And on the backside, yeah, we're bringing down a little bit cooler air, but there's really not much of it up to the north. And that's all for our Tuesday edition of Forecast Lab. I'll leave you some more footage of Tropical Depression Beta. Keep in mind that we do have a free instability skew-t and hodograph handbook. There will be a drawing for that at the end of the month for new Patreon signups. So there's the link if you want to take a try at that. Right now you're only competing with 2 other people, so your odds are pretty good. And in doing so, you can help support the video cast. All right, guys, have a good evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.